to otherwise.
It isn't a specific stomach ailment. It doesn't have a name or anything. I mean, it had been building up for so many years that I was, suicidal. I mean, I just didn't want to live. So I just thought, if I'm gonna die, if I'm gonna kill myself, I should take some drugs, May as well become a junkie, because I felt like a junkie every day.
April 1994. Seattle. In a quiet house near Lake Washington, an electrician arrived for a routine job. Instead, he found Kurt Cobain. A shotgun lay beside him. A note was left for Bada, the imaginary friend Kurt had created in childhood and carried into adulthood. The ruling was suicide. Within hours, the media broke the news. MTV anchor Kurt Loder told stunned viewers.
Hi, I'm Kurt Loder with an MTV News special report on a very sad day. Kurt Cobain, the leader of one of rock's most gifted and promising bands, Nirvana, is dead, and this is the story as we know it so far.
In Seattle, thousands gathered in the rain for a vigil. Many of them teenagers who had built their lives around his music. To them, it felt as if their own voice had been silenced. Years later, the Seattle police reopened the case, released previously unseen photographs, and confirmed the same conclusion. Nothing changed the verdict, yet the questions never faded. How could the boy who became the reluctant voice of a generation end his story like this? Suicide was not unknown in the Cobain family. Uncles, cousins, even a great-uncle had taken their own lives. It doesn't explain everything, but it frames the tragedy. This story is not about conspiracy. It is about causes. What built Kurt Cobain? What broke him? And why his voice, one that spoke for millions, never came back? Kurt Donald Cobain was born in 1967 in Aberdeen, Washington, a damp mill town where the sky was gray and the air smelled of sawdust. As a child, he was lively, drawing cartoons, singing Beatles songs at family gatherings. Relatives remembered him strumming a toy guitar, hungry for applause. Everything changed when he was 9. His parents divorced, and Kurt later said that moment shattered his life. From then on, he was passed between homes, with his mother, his father, and various relatives. Each move brought new rules and deepened his sense of not belonging anywhere. With his mother, Wendy, life meant volatility. Her partner was abusive, and Kurt grew up watching fights that often turned violent. He wrote later that he stopped believing in marriage before he reached his teens. Life with his father, Don, was strict and cold. Don remarried, bringing stepchildren into the house. Kurt tried to fit in, even joined Little League Baseball to please his father, but it never worked. Relatives remembered him sitting apart, quiet and uncomfortable. Eventually, Don admitted he couldn't handle raising him, and Kurt was sent elsewhere. The rejection stayed with him. At school, he once scratched into a desk, "I hate mom, I hate dad, dad hates mom, mom hates dad. It simply makes you want to be sad." Teachers saw a boy who was bright and talented in art, but restless, angry, and increasingly isolated. Physical burdens made it worse. He suffered from asthma and crippling stomach pain no doctor could explain. He was prescribed stimulants for hyperactivity, but he hated the way they made him feel. Later, he would describe it as his first forced introduction to drugs.
I mean, it had been going on and building up for so many years that I was, suicidal. I mean, I just didn't want to live. So I just thought, if I'm gonna die, if I'm gonna kill myself, I should take some drugs, May as well become a junkie, because I felt like a junkie every day,
Still, there were moments of hope. His uncle Chuck recognized his obsession with music and gave him a guitar for his 14th birthday. It was the first thing that felt truly his own. Kurt shut himself in his room, teaching himself Beatles chords one day and blasting raw punk riffs the next. He hung around rehearsals of the Melvins, absorbing their sound. Buzz Osborne handed him mixtapes of underground punk, opening a world beyond Aberdeen. He also filled notebooks with sketches, collages, fragments of lyrics. Dark, strange, often funny. They were the private world of a child who felt abandoned and needed to create meaning. Aberdeen gave him rain, poverty, and a broken home. His parents gave him instability. But that guitar, and the music it unlocked, gave him a way out.
Oh no, not me.
For years, people have said Kurt Cobain lived under a bridge. The story appears in magazines, documentaries, and fan lore. The truth was less romantic. Kurt did spend time beneath the Yonge Street Bridge in Aberdeen, smoking weed, listening to the river, sometimes sleeping there when home felt unbearable. But he never lived there for months. Biographers confirmed it was a refuge, not a residence. Still, the image endured because it fit the myth. The lonely genius under a bridge, waiting to be discovered. What was real was his growing obsession with music. By his mid-teens, Kurt had decided it would be his life. He consumed everything he could. The melodies of the Beatles, the heavy churn of the Melvins, the raw aggression of Black Flag. His uncle's guitar became a lifeline. He taught himself by ear, inventing progressions when he couldn't find the correct chords. In 1985, he recorded his first true demo with Dale Crover of the Melvins. They called it Fecal Matter. The songs were raw, abrasive, filled with lyrics about alienation and decay. The tape circulated only among friends, but those who heard it recognized something new.
She said she's changed. She said she...
One of them was Krist Novoselic, a tall bass player from Aberdeen. Kurt nagged him for months to form a band. Eventually, Krist agreed. Kurt also experimented alone. With a 4-track machine, he created demos of fragmented songs and collages. He sent tapes to independent labels and appeared on local compilations. The recordings were rough but unmistakable. A sense of melody buried in noise, beauty dragged out of frustration. This was his training ground. Bridge hangouts, 4-track tapes, a band with an ugly name. Out of poverty, boredom, and alienation, Kurt Cobain was quietly building the foundations of Nirvana. By the late 1980s, Kurt Cobain had left Aberdeen for Olympia, a college town that felt freer and more welcoming to outsiders. He lived in a cramped space his friends called the Pink Apartment because of its faded walls. Surrounded by drawings, collages, and cigarette smoke, he began shaping the voice that would define Nirvana. His notebooks filled with sketches and fragments of lyrics, half poems, half confessions, the earliest outlines of his songs. At the time, Kurt lived with Tracy Marander. She worked long hours in restaurants to keep them afloat, while Kurt stayed home writing, drawing, and playing guitar. They were broke, often with little food in the fridge, but Tracy believed in him completely. Once she told him half in frustration, "You never write about me." Kurt's answer was a song, about a girl. Tender and melodic, it stood apart from his heavier material, and later appeared on Bleach. It proved that beneath the distortion, Kurt always carried a pop songwriter's heart. Years later, when Nirvana released Incesticide, the cover featured one of Kurt's own paintings, but Tracy's presence still lingered in the photos and stories from those years. Reminders of the woman who supported him when no one else did.
Is it true that he wrote that song, about a girl? He said, "I can't spend every night with you for free."
He never told me directly that song was about me. Michael Azarad said that Kurt said that it was. It's a beautiful song, actually. I mean, I love that song.
The band itself was still unstable. Kurt had convinced Krist Novoselic to join him, but drummers came and went. They played under names like Skid Row, Pincap Chew, Bliss, and Ted Ed Fred. Never satisfied, still searching for an identity. Eventually, Kurt chose a single word, Nirvana. He said he wanted a name that meant freedom and release, the opposite of their chaotic live shows.
It was 9 o'clock in the morning and I was hungover, so I don't know what I said. I don't even remember.
Well, the way it went that I read it was Nirvana means freedom from pain and
suffering in the external world. That's just
That's
the
it.
Webster's dictionary. I mean, that's just right out of the Webster's dictionary.
And you said, as far as you could tell, that's what punk means to you. So it was the perfect name. That's not why you chose the name then.
Now I remember. Yeah, that's why. Sure.
Okay. I don't want to harp on the name. It wasn't.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
It'll be a household word in no time.
In January 1988, Nirvana recorded a demo with Jack Endino at Reciprocal Recording in Seattle. Endino, struck by Kurt's songwriting, passed the tape to Bruce Pavitt and Jonathan Poneman of Sub Pop Records. They signed the band. The first release was a 7-inch single, a cover of Shocking Blues' Love Buzz. It didn't break nationally, but in Seattle's underground it made people take notice. That led to their debut album Bleach. Recorded quickly at Reciprocal, the entire session cost $606.17, money fronted by guitarist Jason Everman. In a strange twist, his name appeared on the album cover as a band member, but he never played a note on the record. Fans still point to it as one of those odd, ironic details that defined Nirvana from the beginning. When Bleach came out in 1989, it was heavy and sludgy, closer to Black Sabbath and Mudhoney than the Beatles' melodies Kurt also loved. Sales were modest, only tens of thousands, but in Seattle it mattered. Nirvana was now part of the sound people had started to call grunge. They toured relentlessly across the US and into Europe. Vans broke down, crowds were small, nights ended in borrowed rooms and empty pockets. But even in front of 50 people, something cut through. Kurt's voice, fragile and furious, turned every contradiction of his life into songs that hit harder than words alone. Out of a pink-walled apartment, a fragile relationship, and a $606 recording bill, Nirvana had begun their climb. The breakthrough was coming, bigger than anyone, least of all Kurt, could imagine. By 1990, Nirvana had momentum, but Kurt Cobain's personal life was unraveling. For years, he had been in a relationship with Tobi Vail, drummer of Bikini Kill, and a key figure in the Riot Grrrl movement. She was independent, politically radical, and embodied a kind of punk that was bigger than music. Kurt adored her, but the bond was uneven. She rejected the domestic life he longed for. When she pulled away, he was devastated. Friends remembered him chain-smoking, crying, and pouring his heartbreak into songs. Aneurysm stands out as a bitter farewell to Tobi, full of longing and anger. Their breakup left him adrift, both personally and creatively. Soon after, he grew close to Courtney Love. They had met briefly in 1989, but in 1991 their connection exploded. Courtney was brash, volatile, and unafraid to match Kurt's chaos. They collided at a club in Los Angeles and quickly became inseparable. Kurt was blunt about their chemistry. In one interview, when asked about her, he smirked and said, "She's a great fuck." Crude, yes, but it captured the intensity of their bond. Sexual, emotional, and destructive. Friends were divided. Some believed Courtney pushed Kurt further into self-destruction. Others thought she gave him the love and validation he had craved since childhood. Whatever the truth, together they became one of the most infamous couples in rock. The press compared them to Sid and Nancy, and both seemed to accept the role. While his personal life spiraled, Nirvana's music was transforming. With Dave Grohl on drums and Krist Novoselic anchoring the bass, the band's sound grew tighter and more powerful. They signed with Geffen Records, leaving behind Sub Pop's underground world for the spotlight of a major label. With producer Butch Vig, Nirvana recorded songs that fused punk's rawness with pop instinct. Lithium, In Bloom, Come As You Are. But the turning point was Smells Like Teen Spirit. The title began as a joke. Kathleen Hanna of Bikini Kill spray-painted Kurt Smells Like Teen Spirit on his wall, teasing him about the deodorant his girlfriend wore. Kurt thought it was a revolutionary slogan. He built a song around the phrase, inspired by his love for the Pixies. Quiet verses, explosive choruses. What he meant as parody became an anthem. Released in September 1991, Nevermind was expected to sell modestly. Geffen pressed just 50,000 copies. Then MTV picked up the Teen Spirit video, a grimy pep rally that erupted into chaos, and the song spread like wildfire. By January 1992, Nevermind had knocked Michael Jackson's Dangerous off the top of the Billboard charts. The cover added to the impact, a naked baby swimming toward a dollar bill on a hook. Geffen worried it was too provocative, but Kurt refused to compromise. To him, it symbolized innocence corrupted by greed, and that refusal to soften the message was part of Nirvana's power. Almost overnight, Kurt went from playing dingy clubs to being the most famous rock star in the world. Critics crowned him the voice of a generation. To Kurt, it felt like a curse. He told friends he never wanted to be a spokesman. He only wanted to write honest songs. But it was honesty that made him impossible to ignore.
I'm Dave and I play drums.
I'm Kurt and I play guitar and I sing.
And I'm Krist and I play bass guitar.
The sudden fame collided with his personal chaos. The loss of Tobi still haunted him, even as Courtney stormed into his life. Their relationship was volatile, magnetic, impossible to hide. Within months of Nevermind's release, they were inseparable. The tabloids turned them into caricatures, but the truth was more complicated. Courtney gave Kurt the validation he had always lacked, and he gave her the spotlight she had chased for years. Meanwhile, Nirvana was reshaping the culture. Nevermind didn't just sell millions, it toppled the old order. Hair metal and polished pop gave way to rawness, honesty, and pain. By the end of 1991, the shift was undeniable. At the center of it all stood Kurt Cobain, fragile, furious, brilliant, and already overwhelmed by the machine he had just conquered. The success of Nevermind should have been a dream. For Kurt Cobain, it felt like a trap. Overnight, he went from obscurity to being branded the voice of a generation. MTV couldn't get enough of him. Rolling Stone put him on the cover. Stadiums screamed his words back at him. But Kurt never wanted to be a spokesman. All he wanted was honesty, and for him, honesty meant pain. Since childhood, he had suffered from asthma and severe stomach problems. Doctors never gave him a clear diagnosis. He tried everything: diets, antacids, painkillers. Nothing worked. He described the pain as a burning hole in his stomach. Heroin for him wasn't about rebellion, it was relief. "I use it because I can't handle the pain," he admitted.
No, they never figured out what it was. I mean, most gastrointestinal doctors don't know anything about the stomach diseases. They just have a PhD, you know? They get paid a lot of money for pretending and prescribing you different drugs, and it's a total scam as far as I'm concerned, because I've been going to doctors for 6 years, and I've tried every drug available except for this one last one that's brand new, and it finally worked.
What began as self-medication quickly became dependency. By 1992, the world saw him as a star. Behind the scenes, he was exhausted, fragile, and slipping deeper into addiction. Friends saw the swings, one day sharp and funny, the next barely able to move. The tabloids caught on, turning every rumor and relapse into headlines. His private battle became a public spectacle. Amid the chaos came love. Courtney Love had become his partner in every sense: loud, volatile, fiercely protective. In February 1992, they married on a beach in Hawaii. Later that year, their daughter Frances Bean was born. For a brief moment, fatherhood seemed to steady him. He told friends that being a dad was the most important thing he had ever done. But joy quickly turned into humiliation. That same year, Vanity Fair published a sensational article claiming Courtney had used heroin while pregnant. Authorities intervened, and for a time, Kurt and Courtney lost custody of Frances. The shame crushed him. Kurt wept uncontrollably, terrified of being seen as an unfit father. He wanted to protect his daughter, but his addictions and the media storm made that almost impossible. On stage, Nirvana still looked unstoppable. In 1993, they released In Utero, raw, abrasive, and deliberately unpolished, Kurt's attempt to fight back against the slickness of Nevermind. But offstage, his health and his marriage were unraveling. Fame had given him everything he once thought he wanted: money, recognition, a family. Inside, he was still the boy from Aberdeen, sick, insecure, desperate for love, and trapped in a cycle of addiction that even fatherhood couldn't break. By 1993, Kurt Cobain was desperate to push back. Nevermind had made him rich and famous, but to him it felt too polished, too close to the pop world he wanted to resist. For the follow-up, he demanded the opposite: raw, abrasive, unfiltered. Nirvana hired Steve Albini, the punk producer known for his brutal, no-frills approach. They finished In Utero in just 2 weeks. The sound was jagged and confrontational. Songs like Rape Me and Scentless Apprentice dared radio to ban them. Kurt wanted to burn away the gloss of Nevermind. But the label pushed back. Geffen executives worried the record was too harsh. They pressured Nirvana to remix key tracks. In the end, Scott Litt softened Heart-Shaped Box and All Apologies, giving them the clarity radio required. Kurt agreed reluctantly, torn between punk ideals and commercial reality. Even with that compromise, In Utero was a triumph. Critics hailed it as fearless, though some mainstream fans were unsettled. For Kurt, it was proof that he could still speak in his own voice under a spotlight that never dimmed. Then came what many consider Nirvana's finest performance, MTV Unplugged in New York. In November 1993, the band walked onto a stage decorated not with celebration, but with lilies and black candles, more like a funeral than a concert. Kurt insisted on the setting, and he shaped the setlist himself. No Smells Like Teen Spirit, no greatest hits. Instead, he chose deep cuts and covers that exposed the fragility beneath the noise. He invited the Meat Puppets to join them, giving space to a band he admired, rather than delivering what MTV expected. The show closed with Where Did You Sleep Last Night, an old folk song by Leadbelly. Kurt's voice cracked on the final scream, then fell into silence.
My girl, don't lie to me. Shine that shiver.
When producers begged for an encore, he refused. The room was stunned. Months later, after his death, the performance would feel like a farewell. For a moment, Kurt had taken control again. In Utero was his rawest artistic statement, and Unplugged revealed a side of Nirvana that was intimate, haunting, and unforgettable. But behind the triumph, the pain and pressure were only growing. By early 1994, Kurt Cobain's pain was no longer manageable. His stomach problems were relentless, his drug use constant, and his marriage under strain. Friends described a man swinging between brief moments of clarity and deep, numbing despair. The warning signs were clear. On March 3rd in Rome, Kurt was rushed to a hospital after being found unconscious in his hotel room. He had taken a combination of Rohypnol and champagne. Courtney Love called it his first suicide attempt. His management described it as an accident, perhaps a cry for help, but not a plan to die. Kurt later dismissed it as a misunderstanding. Like so much in his final year, the truth was murky. In the weeks that followed, concern grew. Friends, bandmates, and managers tried to stage interventions. Krist Novoselic urged him to get clean, warning the band could not survive otherwise. Courtney begged him to think of Frances, their young daughter. Management feared tours and contracts would collapse under the weight of his condition. Kurt finally agreed to enter rehab. In March 1994, he checked into Exodus Recovery in Los Angeles. For a moment, there was hope. Photos show him faintly smiling, holding his daughter, as if ready to fight. But within days, he scaled a wall, walked out, and vanished. Back in Seattle, friends tried to find him. He bought a shotgun with Dylan Carlson, saying it was for protection from intruders. He stopped taking calls. He withdrew from everyone. Rumors spread quickly. Kurt was using again, hiding, refusing to face the world. To outsiders, Nirvana looked unstoppable. Behind the scenes, Kurt Cobain was disappearing into the spiral, trapped between addiction, chronic pain, and the crushing weight of fame. In early April 1994, Kurt Cobain disappeared. He had walked away from rehab in Los Angeles, climbed a wall, and flown back to Seattle. For friends and family, it was terrifying. Courtney Love, desperate to find him, hired a private investigator. Friends searched his usual haunts. No one knew where he was. On April 8th, an electrician arrived at Kurt's house near Lake Washington to install a security system. Through a window, he saw a body. It was Kurt. He had been dead for days. A Remington 20-gauge shotgun lay beside him. A note was addressed to Bada, the imaginary friend from his childhood. The official report ruled suicide. Toxicology showed a high level of heroin in his system, along with traces of diazepam. For some, the dose seemed impossibly high, fueling speculation that he could not have pulled the trigger. But experts explained that long-term users develop tolerance. Even massive amounts may not be instantly fatal. Years later, the Seattle police reviewed the case, released previously unseen photographs, and confirmed the same conclusion. News broke within hours. On MTV, anchor Kurt Loder read the bulletin, his voice heavy with shock. Across Seattle, thousands gathered in the rain for a candlelight vigil. Many were teenagers who felt Kurt had been their voice. Some sobbed uncontrollably. Others read his lyrics aloud, clinging to them for meaning. The grief spread worldwide. Fans in London, Berlin, and Paris held vigils. His name was spray-painted on walls. Nevermind played on repeat until tapes wore thin. In Seattle, counselors set up hotlines for distraught teenagers. At least one fan reportedly took his own life in the days after Kurt's death, amplifying the tragedy. To the public, it was the sudden end of a legend, but those close to him knew it had been building for years. The pain, the addiction, the pressure, the contradictions he could never resolve. Kurt Cobain was 27 years old. He joined the dark fraternity of Hendrix, Joplin, and Morrison. To his fans, it felt like an unfinished sentence. Kurt Cobain's death sent shockwaves across America and Europe. In Seattle, thousands stood in the rain for a candlelight vigil. Fans held each other, sang Nirvana songs, and cried openly. Courtney Love arrived with a megaphone, reading from Kurt's note. Her voice broke as she cursed him, wept, and begged the crowd not to let grief turn into silence.
Sometimes I feel as I should have a punch-in time clock before I walk out on stage. I've tried everything within my power to appreciate it, and I do. God, believe me, I do, but it's not enough. I appreciate the fact that I and we have affected and entertained a lot of people. I must be one of those narcissists who only appreciate things when they're...
It was raw, chaotic, unforgettable. MTV carried the tragedy into homes across the country. Kurt Loder broke the news in a broadcast that teenagers still recall decades later. In the following days, crisis hotlines were overwhelmed. Many fans said that when Kurt died, a part of them died too. Europe responded with the same intensity. In London, thousands filled Hyde Park chanting his name. In Berlin, teenagers marched with candles and posters. In Paris, magazines called him a poet of rage and tenderness. To many, Cobain was not just an American rock star. He was the voice of what it felt like to be young, disillusioned and unheard. His music lived on. Record stores in the US and Europe sold out of Nirvana albums within weeks. When MTV Unplugged in New York was released later that year, it sounded less like a concert and more like a farewell. The closing song, Where Did You Sleep Last Night, ended with Kurt's scream breaking into silence. He refused to sing another note. That moment, one voice pushed to its breaking point, became his most haunting epitaph. Those closest to him carried his shadow forward. Dave Grohl turned pain into purpose, forming Foo Fighters, and becoming one of rock's most enduring figures. Krist Novoselic stepped back from fame, channeling his energy into politics and activism. Courtney Love remained in the spotlight with Hole, balancing acclaim with controversy. Their daughter Frances Bean grew up under a legacy she never chose. As an adult, she began curating her father's journals and artwork, revealing the humor and fragility behind the noise. In 2014, Nirvana was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Dave, Krist, and Courtney stood together on stage for the first time in years.
I just miss him so much. He was such an angel. Thank you.
Performances by Joan Jett, St. Vincent, Lord, and Kim Gordon gave Kurt's songs new voices. It was proof of what fans always knew. His music still mattered and always would. Kurt Cobain was 27 years old when he died. Some placed him in the 27 Club alongside Hendrix, Joplin, and Morrison. But for millions, he remains something else entirely. Proof that honesty, messy, painful, uncomfortable honesty can change the world. And though his voice was silenced in 1994, it never stopped echoing. In every teenager who picks up a guitar, in every band that dares to scream and whisper in the same breath, in every listener who finds his songs and feels less alone. That is what really happened to Kurt Cobain. His story ended. His voice did not.